Sweet surrender as I love, serve, and remember.
So what is it that brings you to Sunday services? Whether you're here in person, online, and not necessarily here, but just in general, what is it that draws you to Sunday services? Just answer that question really quickly in your mind. And so my other question for you today is, what drew you here today? It's kind of what we ask at the beginning of service. What brought your heart here to be in the space, to be online? What brought you here today? Carl Jung says that when we get the right questions, we've answered 50% of the problem. That getting the right question is so key. Albert Einstein puts it even more than that. Albert Einstein said if he had an hour to answer a question, solve a problem, if he had an hour to solve a problem, he would spend the first 55 minutes on what the question is. That the most important part is to getting really clear on what is the question I'm trying to understand, that I'm trying to get to the other side. And so for me, questions are about understanding. They lead us to deeper wisdom. We want to know something more or understand something. It could be many fields, what that understanding looks like. So what is it that I'm trying to understand? So I began with two questions. Why do you go to Sunday services? That was actually a question that I had because I went to Sunday school growing up, but as soon as Sunday school stopped in 6th grade, I never went to church. So I was not a regular church goer until I went to Agape in the 90s. And so it was clear why I went to that one particular service, but I didn't have a history of church going. So when I first became a minister, and it was neither good nor bad, I was genuinely curious, why do people come to church? I kept looking at it, I get up and I'm thinking in my mind, like, why are they here? Like, what is it that's bringing them here? And Tim Ferriss says there's the what did he call it? The very strange questions. They seem like just so obvious that you don't ask them or you feel it's too stupid to ask them. And so that was a question like, I as a minister wasn't going to ask that because I thought everyone would think I'm nuts. Like, why are you here? And it wasn't about me. I didn't care what church you went to. I just was wondering what motivated churchgoers. I was curious. I wanted to understand. So that was an understanding, an informational idea, just general idea. The second question I asked you, and I eventually did start asking people, not on a Sunday morning, but behind where I felt safe, like, why do you come on Sunday? It was actually, and I had to answer that for myself as well. When I ask you what brought you here today, that's a little bit more intimate, isn't it? It's more personable. It feels a little bit more vulnerable. Like, one is sort of an idea of why I come. I can sort of be in my head about that, but why are you here today, this morning? That's a one that you have to reveal a little bit about your heart right now in the moment. And so it's a question that builds connection. So a lot of times with understanding, it's informational. I want to understand something more, but a lot of times it's to build connection. And so to understand why we're asking the question, like, what is it that I'm wanting to do with this question, with the information that I have? When people tell me the answers to why they come, what am I going to do with that information? When somebody tells me, why are you here today? I don't have a doing. It's the doing is just the connection. That's my reason for asking, is for connection. Does anyone want to answer about what brought you here today? Share. Connection. She's like, yeah. Michelle.
I always feel spiritually fed.
You feel spiritually fed. God is good, yes.
I call it getting my booster shot.
You what?
Getting my booster shot.
Oh.
With all the like-minded people, and it just keeps it spiritually fed.
oh, I didn't get what you were saying again. She said, I know, I didn't get the connection. So Reverend Andrea was saying it's like her booster shot, that the connection builds up her immunity, because all that love, we get into that vibration. Marcella. It helps you to remember who you are. Love it. That's why you're here.
There's no better place to be.
There's no better place to be. Love that, Jerry. Gloria.
Self-exploration.
Self-exploration. Yes. Love that. Lynn.
Actually, it's Arlene. Arlene says to know and be known.
Arlene on our online says to know and be known. Norma. To play the guitar. Norma says to play the guitar and to get her foundation certificate, which we're handing out today. Hold on, Lynn, and then Mike. Yep.
Rev Kathy says to be inspired.
Rev Kathy, to be inspired.
Plug into a collective consciousness.
To plug into the collective consciousness. Yes?
To have my thought provoked.
To have your thoughts provoked. Isn't it great to hear from one another? Just even in people responding, I feel a little bit more connected than just getting up here and talking. Questions are powerful in building these relationships. I really love this woman named Amber Wright. She's a consultant. And again, it goes to why are we asking the questions? Because she came up with another way of asking a question that I've asked a million times. So one of my limitations is sometimes I can ask too many questions. So Julian would just say, like, Mom, don't ask my friends any more questions. It's like a battering ram. Oh, what about this? And what about that? And it was really from preparing for this talk, I realized, I realize why I ask so many questions, because I'm not asking the right questions. I'm not asking what I really want to know. I didn't stop and listen to the advice of these wise people and to say, what is it, when I'm asking this question, why am I asking this question? What am I wanting? I want a connection. And so one of the questions, she just turned around for me, because I do this a lot. She said, instead of asking somebody what they do, which I do all the time, by the way, because there's often people I don't know, and so I just want to know what field, whether you like your work or don't like your work, I figure you're spending a lot of time at it. It tells me a little bit something about you. That's why I'm asking, to know what field you're in. Are you in computers? Are you a teacher? What are you in real estate? You know, but often I ask people that, and I'm not sure where to go with that, because I generally don't know about their field. I was like, oh, okay, that's nice. Her question is, instead of asking, what do you do? She asked, what about your work inspires you? Isn't that the best? What about your work inspires you? You find out about what someone does, but not what I'm not interested in the field, I'm interested about them. And what about your work inspires you? In one question, not a battery of questions, I suddenly get to know you at a deeper level. The power of questions to build relationship and connection. We have to recognize that that's what we're doing when we're asking questions. We're not just saying, how are you? Like Amber Wright was giving the example of someone, people always asked her how she was, and she was just really tired, working full-time, having to commute, kids at home, cooking, just exhausted. And people say, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Someone just looked at her and said, are you okay? Because they were feeling something different. It was just that little shift. And she just said, I just started crying. She goes, and I had to leave work early, and I didn't come back for another 2 weeks. Just because someone looked me in the eyes and said, are you okay? The power of our questions when they come from the heart, and really, what am I trying to do when I ask this question? Am I making a connection? And sometimes it doesn't lead to long conversations, but just that moment. If someone tells me about what in their work inspires them, excites them, I feel suddenly this incredible connection I didn't feel before. Didn't have to have a 2-hour conversation. She suggests, this is Amber Wright, suggests, for instance, she said, if you have someone who's close to you, a good friend or a partner, and they asked you the question, how do I show you that you are a priority in my life? She said, wouldn't you already feel more connected just by that question? They can come to you and say, you are a priority in my life, or I love you, or they can even come and bring you breakfast in bed. All of those things say you're a priority in my life. But by asking and saying, I want to know what you think, not what I think. What do you consider me with, what can I do? And I'm hearing you, so I'm inviting you into my heart, and you're responding. Or just even, can you tell me what about our connection makes you happy? I mean, these are such simple questions, but how many times do we actually ask these intimate questions of one another? What about our connection makes you happy? Not, this is what makes me happy, the statement, but what about our connection makes you happy? Do you see the shift just in asking that question? It's more vulnerable, it's more deep, it's more connected. Now, in order to have a really powerful give and take, though, the person who's answering also has to answer authentically. So if I said, what about your work inspires you? And that might be too much information for someone you don't know. You could just say, oh, nothing, I like working on the computer, or I like people, or you can give a very sort of quick flip answer. Or what about, well, I was walking out the door, so literally, it was a quick question to Julian. I said, Julian, what can I do, or how can I show you that you're a priority? And he immediately said, ask me questions. I said, well, I just asked you questions. And it becomes like because the answers are quick. And so there's something about slowing down, too. And so to recognize, well, I was asking him in a quick way, so he's responding energetically. That actually probably is a genuine answer for him. He likes it when people ask him questions to find out. He goes, I want you to find out about me. And I know that you care about me if you ask me questions. It's a great answer. But it was the energy from which it was coming, too. That I didn't take it in. Like, he didn't really mean that because he said it too fast, but I asked the question fast. So again, it's energetically, am I present? Am I wanting to build not just through the question, but through the time? And sometimes we don't have the time. It's not like we can all walk around and do this all the time, but just to be conscious when it's important that we take the time to do that, and the person who's answering taking the time to answer authentically. Like, this is a genuine answer. So when the person said, are you okay? Her tears were the authentic answer. When people said, how are you doing? And she said, I'm fine, that wasn't an authentic answer. So what brings this question and answer, it's both. The listening, you have to listen to the answer, and responding with authenticity. It starts opening gateways and doorways that just statements don't have. The person who really, or the teacher who brought me very conscious about this is Ramana Maharshi, because he has this practice with the I am. He lives in the absolute. He's like the totally stereotypical guru. He literally sits on a mountain, or he's now transitioned to the other side, although he would say there's no other side because there's no, that would be duality, but we won't go there. So he might still be sitting there for all I know. So he would sit on this mountain, and he got there when he was 14 years old, and he just went through this whole letting everything slough away, die away, until he's just living in the I am. And then people just started feeling vibration and heading towards him, and that's how we know of him, because people came to him and started asking him questions. And one of the things he says is anytime we just anchor in I am, we are now moving closer to truth. I think that's why that chant, I am remembering who I am, is so powerful. And he said, just saying it. He said, you can say it once or twice and you're already shifting, and the more you say it, I am, connecting with the eternal essence of yourself. He said, and you will make progress. He said, but the progress will be much slower than if you ask, who am I? That in the inquiry, you actually are speeding up the response from the universe, and the response is not intellectual. So you can ask, who am I? And then answer that from whatever you know about spiritual principle, however you want to answer it, just from I'm Harriet, all the roles you play in life. You can answer it from a spiritual principle. You can answer it all conceptually, but then eventually you're going to just let all those concepts go and then really ask. Then it just goes deeper. Who am I? Who am I? Who really, who am I? And just stay with that question and let it go deeper and deeper, and allow the listening to go deeper and deeper. And things will start to show up. Answers will start to come, but not of us. And sometimes they're dramatic answers, and sometimes they're just little signs along the way. And we can stay with the question as long as we want. So for me, I stayed with the question for like 3 weeks. I got my answer. It was like I was popped out of my body and blah, blah, blah. So that was an answer. For Ramana Maharshi, that was his lifelong inquiry. Who am I? He didn't stop asking, who am I? Because we're infinite beings. There's no way he would move into other realms just by the question. It's the question that leads you there. You can say, I am, but the question takes you deeper. And here's what's fascinating. They have found this in research, too. I was listening to this research study where they took two groups and they were focusing on anagrams. And so they had one group that just affirmed over and over, I am really good at anagrams. I am really good at anagrams. I am really good at anagrams. That was what was given to them. The other group was to ask questions about what would make me a good anagram? How would I do this better? And there didn't have to be just one question. You just sort of ask a lot of questions about being able to do an anagram. How would you do one? What would make me do better? How could I do this answer, be an anagram better? How can I find more words? And after they gave them a certain amount of time, they went and did anagrams. And the people who asked the questions did 50% better. 50%, that's a lot, than the people who just made statements. This is huge. This is really, really big. Questions move us along faster and go deeper because they open us up. We don't start with, I know the answer. This is big for us in New Thought because we do a lot of affirmations. But when we really look at it, the founders weren't doing affirmation after affirmation. The way they got to what they believe is through inquiry. We come from a tradition of inquiry, of like, Joel Goldsmith is one of my favorite examples because I had already been in New Thought, one power, one presence, we all love, it's all good, there's no opposing thing, I got it, I'm with you. And then he started writing in chapter 3 of Thunder of Silence. He's like, well, I think we still really believe in two powers because we're still trying to overcome something. And if there's nothing, and he just started looking, he just sort of broke it down. Like, what is power? And it might not excite you that much, but it totally excited me because he just took it to a much deeper level. I was just sort of saying it's one power, and he was like, well, let's really look at this. And when I say let's, he's doing this in his meditation, in his work. What does this mean by power? What do we mean by power? Really, power over what? Power to do what? Just when you take something and you just keep asking, what is this? And you're asking not your own mind. You're not asking all the book and the research. Just taking that Orthodox class, I forgot how much they depend on secondary sources. Well, this is what so-and-so says, and this is what so-and-so says. No, you're going directly to spirit. What is power? What is that? What is that? And then he has his revelations, and he's sharing that. And then I read this wonderful thing about Charles Fillmore, who was one of the co-founders of Unity. And he said, when someone was saying something that he had said, he said, well, no, that's the answer I got to through my process, And you might agree with my conclusion, but you have to go through the process yourself. You can't depend on my process of how I got to this truth. You have to go through it. You have to own it by asking your own question. You might think there's only one power, one presence, but have you actually really inquired about it? When you go to Unity Village, but I don't know if anyone here, has anyone here been to Unity Village? Joni is, of course, in Marcella. It's so beautiful. Kansas City, Missouri. They have a room where Charles Fillmore, they still have his chair and the fireplace in which he sat, and he used to spend hours sitting in that chair contemplating what is truth, what is this, what is this? Hours in front of the fire, just being in contemplation. This is so much of our history of asking questions, not just declaring, asking, because we actually learn more, and we're infinite beings, so the asking never ends. That's why Ramana Maharshi is such a great example, because it never ends. Because when we say the world is infinite, it is infinite. I think he actually uses the question just to get him into that transcendent, non-thinking space. So we ask the questions that really matter to us. One of the things that struck me, and I talked a little bit about it last week, and then I was struck this week as I'm again going through different videos, almost every person talking about curiosity or asking questions refer to, well, children ask a lot of questions. Do you know they answer like actually I heard this week, it's 390 questions. It seems like a lot of questions in one day. I'm not quite sure, but they say that's the average. And then we're just, because we just dive down and ask this, then we stop asking questions by middle school. So that's what I said last week, but I've been thinking about that, pondering that, as one does. And I thought, I don't think it's just that we've stopped being curious. I think we are inherently curious people. But I also think we get smarter. And so what happens is, like if I took my phone and I'm a kid, I'm like, oh, how does a phone work? But if someone who really knows how phones work started answering that question, whoosh, right over my head, I have no idea what you're talking about. Or if I'm not very science technologically oriented, so it's also lack of interest. I'm like, I'm really not that interested. And I might glaze over the answer. So a lot of the questions that children ask, why is the sky blue? What makes the grass? Sometimes the answers are interesting, but sometimes they're more magical. You say little fairies are running around. Well, that would be a fun answer. Getting into a scientific answer probably might turn off a lot of questions. So I think one of the reasons why people stop asking questions is because the answers aren't all that interesting, or they're really complicated. You realize, oh, if I ask that question, I'm actually asking a really complicated question. Why is there suffering in the world? That's a really difficult question to ask and answer in 2 minutes. So I think one of the reasons why we say we stop losing curiosity is because we realize a lot of these things that we're asking are just way beyond either our interest or our ability to understand. So we stop asking, but I don't think it's because we're stopped being curious. So as we're on this spiritual journey, I was just thinking, so what does curiosity look like for our age group? For us 20-year-olds. We've already had a lot of life experience. I'm looking around, most of us have been on the spiritual path for quite a long time, or we just, there's a lot of stuff we already know. So how do we live as curiosity, how do we be like curious children that have that same energy and wonder as adults? And I think the only way to do it is because we have to find things that we're genuinely curious about. And I think we forget to actually, why do we ask questions? The great thing about asking why do we ask questions is, well, what is it? Why am I asking questions? Like, what do I really want to know? What does really matter to me? I had this passing thought 2 weeks ago, because I knew it was coming up in curiosity, and I'm like, I wonder what makes me laugh. I was just sort of curious, like, what is it that makes me laugh? And then I realized within 2 days, I'm not that interested. Like, I couldn't hold on to the question because I just wasn't genuinely, like, funny things make me laugh. I don't know. It wasn't a question that engaged me. So one of the very things that we got to be doing is, what are the questions that engage us, that actually, like, it's not just a question I'm asking for a day. It's a question that I want to continue to delve into and allow it to go deeper and deeper in my soul. What are those questions? And it's going to be different for everybody. What is it that I really want to understand about me and relationships, how I relate to the world, divine questions, maybe suffering for Paramahansa Yogananda, why they were suffering, that was a huge question for him. So one of his pastimes was to go visit enlightened people. He loved visiting saints and sages. Whatever country he was in, he sought them out. And he asked them all the same question: how do you explain suffering? And he just kept asking and asking. And this is a guy who already teaches and shows up as an enlightened being, but he still was curious. That was a question that didn't go away for him, because it really bothered him. I mean, remember he lived during World War I and World War II, so he saw a lot of pain. And he would think about the men who are in war, and he had some experiences, and it was very upsetting to feel, to be in, he was in a soldier's body who, he had the whole experience of being shot by the bullet, and then he was back meditating. It's like, wow, that it's just a dream, but boy, did that seem real. Why is this world suffering? So that's a question that, as enlightened as he was and is, that was a question that carried him, that engaged him. So it can be another question. He knew about bliss. He didn't ask about bliss because he lived in bliss all the time. So how do you have bliss and suffering? That's why I think it bothered him so much, the disparity. How can you live in oneness and bliss and still have suffering? But you can ask, we have this class, treatment and meditation on Tuesdays, and that's the practice this week, is contemplation. And so I was suggesting, like, let's say you want to know about absolute joy. You can just keep saying, I am absolute joy, and just be in the presence of absolute joy. Or you can ask, what is absolute joy? And really start asking, what is absolute joy? And the reason why it's infinite is because your answer today might be different than tomorrow. And what we have to recognize, this is an actual path to the divine. So I always say, like, there's 8 billion people, so there's 8 billion paths to the divine, because we all have our unique path. But in Hinduism, they have 4 paths. Do you all know about the 4 paths in Hinduism? It seems like most of you know them, so I'll just repeat them. So the 4 paths, so you have bhakti yoga. Yoga means unification with God, union with God. So it's bhakti, which is through devotion. So you learn to have oneness with the divine through devotion. Karma yoga is through service, so you learn to have oneness with the divine through service. So Mother Teresa is a perfect example of karma yoga, just in constantly giving of herself. She is giving herself to the divine, right? You have meditation. Meditation is where you just sit and you meditate, and that includes prayer, but prayer often still can keep you in your mind until you transcend the mind, and once you've transcended the mind, you're now in meditation. It means moving past our normal, start tapping into an awareness that's beyond just our thinking mind. And so meditation is a path, by learning different meditation techniques to go deeper and deeper, and we know our oneness and union in God. The other path is jnana yoga. Now, jnana yoga is often put in English as knowledge, but that's not really what it is. That's what turned me off about it for so long, because knowledge is just like collecting information. There's people who've read a ton of spiritual books and they can just rattle off all this stuff. Doesn't mean that they know their oneness and union in God. It just means they can write, like being in my class, a lot of people who can give a lot of thoughts, very intelligent and interesting, but not necessarily have a mystical experience. Mystical, by the way, a mystical experience is having the experience of oneness. Just a side note, just a little education here. You can have an out-of-body experience, but that's not a mystical experience. That's what I would call a non-ordinary state experience, because that's just sort of your energy body leaving and coming back. A mystical experience is the actual experience of oneness. There's no body and me, it's all one. And wisdom, inquiry, contemplation is an actual path to get to that mystical state of oneness. That's how powerful asking these questions are. That's how Ramana Maharshi lived in this enlightened state. It was through asking questions. I have a friend, I'd say, I always feel friend, we only kind of know each other. I met him 30 years ago, and he was very religious and really believed, followed the structure of his religion, and I wasn't, and didn't really resonate with it at all, but I liked him. Like, there was a connection with him, but I couldn't figure out this whole religion thing that he was doing. So we haven't talked a lot, but we've been talking recently, because as I was going into learning about Orthodox Christianity, I go in my little things of learning things. I was learning Orthodox Christianity last year. And so I started asking him questions, and we were looking at his book, and I'm like into page 50, and he's like, oh no, I'm still on page 2. How long does it take you to read? He goes, oh, well, this line, and he talks about a line, and he's like, I have to stop and I have to spend all day with it. And then he started sharing all this stuff that was coming to him from one line. And I'm like, how did you get all that from that one line? I just read it, I'm like, yeah, I got it, and I moved on. But it was that very willingness to not know. So you think of Zen mind, beginner mind, have that beginner's mind. We think of so many teachings about being humble, about being open. I remember when I was at Agape, a minister had been there just been doing this path for years, decades, and I know we have people who have been doing this for decades. She goes, oh, I'm just reading the Science and Mind textbook, and it's like, I can't even believe there's so much stuff I'm reading now that I never saw before. When we're really tapping into spiritual truth, we can read the same line, but it's infinite, and we don't just skip over it. We take it and we really just sort of, and what he does is he doesn't say, oh, I know what that means. He goes, I wonder what that means. Like, what does that mean? And I'm like, it's obvious what it means. Hurry up and read the book. But he spends it's so cumbersome, but he has so much wisdom, and that's what started drawing in me to have these questions with him, because he would start spouting off all this wisdom. I'm like, where did you get that? Which book did you read? I don't read, I'm saying all this for us to recognize that this asking of questions is so extraordinarily powerful, and it can change our lives. It can change our lives with other people. It can change our lives with work. It can change our lives with our body. It can change our lives with money. It can change our lives with social activism, with everything that's happening in the world, and it can change our lives with the divine presence itself, so we actually remember who and what we really are, because we start asking, who and what am I? Who and what is this divine presence? Who is this presence that I'm talking with? Who is this presence that I keep saying is me? For those who say, I am, well, what is that? What does that even mean? It can change our lives, this asking of questions, and it can do it today. So when you're talking with people, note to yourself, am I only, are we just sharing stories, or am I actually asking questions to really get to know their soul? And maybe I'll just stop for a second and think about what question I want to ask. Slow down the conversation maybe a little, and really be present to their soul and to their heart as I'm talking with them. And I'm listening. We did a wonderful listening class, exercise last week in class, of just listening to people without an agenda of what I'm going to say in response, but just really listening to what they're saying without judgment, without trying to overlap with my thoughts. It changes everything. It changes our little world instantly, asking questions. So tonight and all this week, I invite you to end your day with, what great question did I ask today? Yeah? What great questions did I ask today? Let's pray. So we're going to begin our prayer just inviting inquiry. So rather claiming and accepting what we know, let us join in the inquiry. What is this oneness to which we turn in this moment? What is this oneness? Where is it? What does it feel like? How does it show up in my awareness right now? How does oneness show up in my life? What does that even mean? Oneness. Does oneness include everything in my awareness right now? Is there anything outside of oneness? Is there anything outside of this oneness? Is there an experience, a feeling, a creative expression out in the world that isn't part of this oneness? Does this oneness have a beginning and an ending? Does this oneness have any limitations? Does this oneness love? Does it think? Is it intelligent? Is there any place where it's not intelligent? It seems like there's people who aren't intelligent in the world. How do I have a oneness that is only intelligence and then there's not intelligence? How do we have a oneness that's only love, but then there's places where there's no love? How does that even work? It's okay to ask questions. Don't be afraid. We can be in prayer and asking questions. They are not separate things sometimes. And we allow ourselves to start allowing new life and new ways to understand things in ways that transcend our concepts, that transcend easy answers. We are willing and courageous and compassionate and so connected that we are free enough to ask these questions into the depth of our being. Is this oneness pure love? We can even ask of the oneness, are you pure love? When I talk to you, are you separate from me? Are you one with me? And as we open our heart and our body and our mind and our soul, we allow these wonderful answers, these answers that transcend thought, to start filling our heart and our soul beyond our wildest imagination, that we don't have to hold on to the answers because we feel and we know and we experience love itself. Not the concept of love, but the actual love pouring through us, those places in ourselves that we might feel shame or separation or fear or ignorance, and even there, love is. Because we have inquired, and love reveals itself and its soul and its being and its presence in every area of our life, inwardly and outwardly. It is real, not because we are affirming that it is real, but because through our discovery, through our contemplation, we have discovered for ourselves directly and intimately and powerfully, love is all that there has ever been and ever will be, and there is no beginning and there is no ending. It is ever present, always, forever, animating itself as my life and as your life and as all life itself. Even those places that feel loveless, there is love. Even those places that feel fearful and dark, there is love. We know that we know that we know because we have inquired. That is why we are here today, is because of our inquiries. And in the depth of our soul, we know love is, I am. Love is, I am. And from this place of love is, I am, through these revelations that are open and that we are willing to experience more and more all week long this week, we continue to have healings and revelations beyond anything we've ever experienced before by opening ourselves and asking and inviting this divine love into our heart, into our soul, to reveal these truths to us beyond just our mind, into our heart and into our body, into our past and into our future, into all elements of who we are, into our relationships, those relationships that are easily and effortlessly, and those relationships that are difficult, that invite us into our understanding of this world in which we are living, this love that is continuing being invited by each and every one of us. It is answering us in ways that are specific and unique to each of us. We are receiving and knowing and feeling into those answers. We are open and we are willing, we are safe to answer these questions, to ask and answer these questions. Because that's why we are here, to not walk in the maybe, but to know that we know that we know, not with words, not with affirmations, but from the pure divine love itself, that intimate, passionate, radiant love without beginning and without ending, and that is right here, right now, in the midst of all of us. And we call it forth in every area of our life. We call forth that healing energy on every area of our life, and we allow ourselves to open and open and open and ask again and ask again and ask again. Every time we go in doubt, doubt's okay, skepticism is okay, not knowing is okay. It's those very wonderful energies that open us to even more understanding, into more connection, into more revelation. So we just say yes to it all. We say yes to it all. We say yes to it all. And in deep abiding peace, we know that we know that we know. Beyond words, beyond form. We feel it, we experience it, and we know it. We surrender it all. We say yes, and we know in that yes, it is done. And I invite you all to join me now in saying, and so it is. Amen and amen.
I walk in God in all I do. I walk in God in all that